So you're 32 years old, you make $75,000 a year, and you just looked at your retirement account for the first time in 6 months. There's $18,000 in there. You do some quick mental math and think, okay, that's not great, but I've got time, right? I'll just figure it out later. Meanwhile, your friend Sarah, who makes the exact same salary, somehow just bought a house, goes on 2 international trips a year, and casually mentioned she's on track to retire at 55. And you're sitting there wondering, what am I doing wrong? Here's the thing, and this is going to sting a little. You're not actually behind because you don't make enough money. You're behind because nobody ever taught you the specific moves that create actual wealth in your 30s. And the really frustrating part? Most of these moves are completely counterintuitive to what we've been told our entire lives. My name is Jack, and I spent way too much time thinking about why 2 people can make the exact same income and end up in completely different financial universes by age 40. If you're someone who's been meaning to get serious about money for the past 5 years but keeps putting it off because it feels overwhelming, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if this video helps you actually take action on even one of these moves, give it a thumbs up. It helps more people find this content. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. This video isn't about stop buying lattes or make a budget or any of that surface level stuff. We're going deep on the 10 strategic moves that will literally determine whether you're financially free at 55 or still stressed about money at 65. And the order matters here because each move builds on the last one. Okay, here's what most people don't realize. High-interest debt isn't just expensive, it's mathematically impossible to build wealth around. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you've got $8,000 in credit card debt at 22% APR. You're making the minimum payment of $200 a month thinking, hey, at least I'm paying it down, right? Wrong. At that rate, it's going to take you 62 months, over 5 years to pay it off, and you're going to pay $4,311 in interest. You just paid $12,311 for $8,000 worth of stuff you probably don't even own anymore. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that should make you angry. While you're paying $200 a month toward that debt, you're not investing that money. If you had invested $200 a month for those same 5 years in a basic index fund averaging 10% returns, you'd have about $15,500. So the real cost of that $8,000 in credit card debt isn't $12,311. It's $27,811 in lost wealth creation, over half your annual salary, just gone. Now, you might be thinking, Jack, I've heard this before. Pay off debt, I get it. But here's what nobody tells you. The psychological shift that happens when you eliminate high-interest debt is more valuable than the math. When you're carrying high-interest debt, every single financial decision you make is compromised. You can't take career risks because you need the steady paycheck. You can't invest aggressively because you need the liquidity. You're playing financial defense instead of offense. Here's the move. Any debt above 7% interest needs to be treated like a financial emergency. Not next year, not after you save up a little first, now. Cut your expenses to the bone for 6 to 12 months if you have to. Pick up a side hustle, sell stuff. I don't care if it's uncomfortable. Being 55 and broke is way more uncomfortable. And look, I know the Dave Ramsey crowd says pay off all debt, including your mortgage. I'm not going there. A 3.5% mortgage, that's basically free money with inflation. We're talking about the toxic stuff, credit cards, personal loans, car loans above 7%. Kill those first. Okay, so you've killed the high-interest debt. Now here's the move that most financial advice gets completely backwards, building what I call your screw you fund. Traditional advice says save 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. And yeah, okay, that's fine. But that framing makes it sound like this money is just sitting there waiting for your car to break down. That is the most uninspiring way to think about the most empowering asset you can own. Here's the thing. Your Screw You fund isn't primarily about emergencies. It's about freedom. It's about having enough cash that you can walk away from a terrible job, a toxic boss, or a dead-end situation without panicking about making rent. It's about being able to say screw you to things that don't serve your life. I learned this the hard way. I was 28, stuck in a job that was slowly killing my soul, but I had $1,200 in savings and $30,000 in student loans. I was trapped, not because of the loans, because of the lack of liquidity. I couldn't afford to quit and look for something better. I couldn't afford to take a temporary pay cut for a better long-term opportunity. I was making decisions from a place of fear instead of strategy. Here's what most people don't realize. The difference between 3 months and 6 months of expenses in liquid savings is the difference between having options and having actual leverage. Let me show you the math. If your monthly expenses are $3,500, then 3 months equals $10,500. You have some breathing room. 6 months equals $21,000. You have legitimate power. That extra $10,500 is the difference between I need to find any job within 90 days and I can be strategic about my next move for 6 months. It's the difference between negotiating a salary from a place of desperation versus a place of strength. But here's where it gets really interesting. A 2019 study by the Federal Reserve found that 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. 40%! Meanwhile, the same study found that people with 6+ months of savings were 3 times more likely to report being satisfied with their financial situation than those with less. This isn't just about the money, it's about the psychological foundation for every other financial decision you make. Here's the move. Aim for 6 months of essential expenses, not 6 months of your current lifestyle, but 6 months of what you'd actually need to survive. Keep it in a high-yield savings account earning at least 4%, which yes, those exist right now. And here's the key. This money doesn't grow your wealth. Its job is to protect your wealth-building capacity. It's financial defense, and you need it locked in before you play serious offense. All right, this one's going to be controversial, but stay with me. If you got a tax refund last year, you're doing it wrong. Look, I know that tax refund feels like free money. You get that $3,000 check from the IRS and it feels like Christmas. But here's what actually happened. The government took an interest-free loan from you for the entire year and then gave you your own money back. Let's do the math. If you got a $3,000 refund, that means you overpaid your taxes by $250 every single month. If you had adjusted your W-4 to keep that money in your paycheck and instead invested it monthly in an index fund earning 10%, by the end of the year, you'd have about $3,165. That's an extra $165. Now, you might be thinking, Jack, $165, that's not life-changing money. And you're right, for 1 year. But this is where the compound effect gets insane. If you do this every year for the next 20 years until you're 40, that's not $3,300 in gains. Because of compound growth, that's over $19,000 in additional wealth. Almost 20 grand just from fixing your tax withholding. But here's the real reason this move matters. It's about developing a wealth-building mindset instead of a scarcity mindset. When you look forward to a big tax refund, you're essentially admitting that you don't trust yourself to manage your own money throughout the year. You're using the government as a forced savings account because you don't believe you can save on your own. That's not a money problem. That's a psychological problem. Here's the move. Go to the IRS website right now and use their tax withholding estimator. Adjust your W-4 so you're as close to zero as possible. Maybe owe $100 to $200 or get back $100 to $200. Then set up an automatic transfer to move that extra money from your paycheck directly into your investment account before you ever see it. You just gave yourself a raise that the government was keeping from you. Okay. This one should be obvious, but according to a 2023 Vanguard study, 21% of employees don't contribute enough to get their full employer 401k match. Let me say that again. 1 in 5 people is leaving free money on the table. This is insane to me, like legitimately insane. Here's the thing. An employer match isn't a benefit, it's part of your salary. If your employer matches 50% up to 6% of your salary and you make $70,000, they're offering you an additional $2,100 per year. That's not a bonus, that's your money. If you're not contributing enough to get it, you literally took a pay cut. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is what people don't calculate. Let's say you're 30 years old and you start maxing out that $2,100 employer match. You invest it in a target date retirement fund averaging 9% annually.
By the time you're 65, that employer match alone, not even counting your contributions, is worth $536,000, $500,000, just from claiming the free money you were already entitled to. Now, you might be thinking, but Jack, I can't afford to contribute 6% right now. I've got bills, I've got student loans, I'm trying to save for a house. Look, I hear you, but let's be real about what's happening here. You're saying you can't afford to accept a 50% immediate return on your investment. You're saying you can't afford free money. The psychological shift you need to make is this. Your 401k contribution up to the match isn't extra savings. It's a mandatory expense. It's as non-negotiable as your rent. You build your budget around it, not the other way around. Here's the move. Log into your 401k portal today, not tomorrow, today, and increase your contribution to at least the match. If you're already getting the match, push it higher. The IRS limit for 2024 is $23,000 per year. If you're maxing that out, congratulations, you're in the top 14% of earners and you're going to be fine. If you're not, every percentage point you increase now is buying years of freedom later. And here's a pro tip. Increase your contribution by 1% every time you get a raise. You'll never miss the money because you never got used to having it, and you'll be surprised how fast you get to that max.
All right, let's talk about why willpower is a terrible wealth-building strategy. Here's what most people don't realize. The number one predictor of whether you'll actually build wealth isn't how much you make, how smart you are, or how motivated you are. It's whether you've automated the process so that it happens without you having to think about it. There's this fascinating study from behavioral economics that looked at 401k participation rates. In companies where employees had to opt in to the 401k, participation was around 60%. In companies where employees were automatically enrolled but could opt out, participation jumped to 90%. Same people, same income levels, same everything, just a different default setting. This is huge. This tells us that we are fundamentally lazy creatures who will take the path of least resistance, and that's actually fine, as long as we set up the path of least resistance to be the wealth-building path. Here's the thing. Every single month, you're making dozens of micro decisions about money. Should I transfer money to savings? Should I invest this extra $200? Should I pay extra on my loans? And every single decision requires willpower, and willpower is a finite resource. By the end of a long day, you're not making optimal decisions. You're making easy decisions. The solution isn't to develop superhuman discipline. The solution is to make one good decision one time and then let automation handle the rest. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Let's say you make $5,000 per month after taxes. Here's the automated system. Day 1, payday. $750, 15% automatically goes to 401k before you see it. $500, 10% automatically transfers to high-yield savings. $300, 6% automatically goes to taxable brokerage account. $200 automatically goes to debt payoff or additional savings goal. What's left goes to your checking account for expenses. You just automated saving and investing 31% of your income without thinking about it. And here's what's really interesting. Let's say you do this from age 30 to 40. That's 10 years of automatically investing $1,050 per month, $750 in 401k, plus $300 in brokerage. At a conservative 9% average annual return, by age 40, you'd have about $214,000 in invested assets. And that's not even counting the employer match or your emergency fund or any raises or bonuses. You went from broke at 30 to having over $200K at 40, and you barely thought about it because it was automated. Now, you might be thinking, but what about fun? What about living my life? I don't want to be a robot. Look, here's the thing. Automation doesn't eliminate fun. It eliminates the guilt and stress around fun. When you know your financial future is handled automatically, you can actually enjoy the money you spend because you're not robbing your future self to do it. Here's the move. Set up your automation this week, not next month, this week. Link your checking account to your savings account, your brokerage account, and your debt payoff system. Set up recurring transfers on payday. Make it so that building wealth is the default, not the exception. And here's a pro tip. When you get a raise, immediately increase your automated transfers by half the raise amount. You still get to enjoy the other half, but you're also accelerating your wealth building without feeling the pinch.
Okay, this one's gonna hurt some egos, but you need to hear it. You are not smarter than the market, and you are definitely not gonna beat it by picking individual stocks. Here's the thing that nobody wants to admit. Professional fund managers, people who do this for a living with teams of analysts and sophisticated models, underperform the S&P 500 about 85% of the time over a 15-year period. 85%! These are literally the smartest, most well-resourced people in finance, and they can't beat a simple index fund. And you think you're going to pick winners by reading Reddit threads and watching YouTube videos after work? Look, I get the appeal. Buying Tesla or Apple or whatever the hot stock is feels exciting. It feels like you're doing something. Index funds feel boring. But here's what most people don't realize. Boring is how you get rich. Exciting is how you stay poor. Let me show you the math. Let's say you're 30 and you invest $500 a month for the next 30 years. Two scenarios. Scenario A, you invest in an S&P 500 index fund averaging 10% annually. By age 60, you'd have $987,000. Scenario B, you try to pick individual stocks. You average 8% annually because of some bad picks and higher fees. By age 60, you'd have $679,000. You just cost yourself $308,000 trying to be clever. That's almost a third of your retirement savings gone because you thought you were smarter than you actually are. But here's the thing. The real killer isn't even the lower returns. It's the psychological torture of trying to time the market and pick winners. You're constantly stressed, checking your portfolio 5 times a day, losing sleep over earnings reports. That stress is literally costing you years of your life. Meanwhile, the index fund investor contributes their monthly amount, barely looks at it, and sleeps like a baby. Now, you might be thinking, but Jack, I know someone who made a killing on crypto, GameStop, Tesla, or whatever. Yeah, and I know someone who won $5,000 at the casino once. That doesn't make gambling a wealth-building strategy. Here's the move. Put 90 to 95% of your investment money into low-cost, broad-market index funds. If you want to scratch the stock-picking itch, take 5 to 10% and play with it. Call it your tuition fund, because you're going to learn expensive lessons. But protect your actual wealth with boring, diversified index funds, U.S. total market, international developed markets, and emerging markets.
All right, here's the uncomfortable truth. At a certain point, you cannot budget your way to wealth. You need to earn more money. Here's the thing. If you make $45,000 a year and save 20%, that's $9,000 per year. Invest that for 20 years at 9% returns, you'll have about $460,000. But if you increase your earnings to $90,000 and still save 20%, that's $18,000 per year. Same 20 years, same returns, but now you have $920,000. You just doubled your retirement savings not by saving harder, but by earning more. And here's what most people don't realize. The gap between 45K and 90K isn't talent or intelligence. It's strategic career moves. Look, there's this study from George Mason University that found people who stay in the same job for more than 2 years earn about 50% less over their lifetime than people who strategically job hop every 2 to 4 years. Why? Because internal raises are typically 3 to 5% annually. External job switches typically come with 10 to 20% increases. Let me show you what this looks like. Let's say you're 28 and making $60,000. Path A, the loyal employee, 4% annual raises, age 40, $96,000. Path B, the strategic job hopper, switch every 3 years with 15% increases, age 40, $104,900. By age 40, the strategic job hopper is making almost $9,000 more per year. Over a 30-year career, Path B earns about $450,000 more in total compensation, almost $500,000 just from being strategic about job changes. Now, you might be thinking, but I like my company. I don't want to be a mercenary. Look, I'm not saying burn bridges. I'm saying be strategic. Every 2 to 3 years, evaluate, is this company investing in my growth? Am I being compensated fairly? If not, explore options. Here's the move. Start building your professional network now. Update your LinkedIn.
Take on projects that give you marketable skills. Every year, go on at least 2 to 3 informational interviews just to understand your market value. And when you switch jobs, negotiate aggressively.
Okay, I know insurance is boring, but here's what most people don't realize. The wrong insurance or no insurance is often the thing that destroys decades of wealth building in a single event. Here's the thing. Insurance isn't about if something bad happens, it's about when something bad happens. Over a 40-year adult life, statistically, something bad will happen. The question is, will that event be an inconvenience or a financial catastrophe? Real example. I know someone who was 36, healthy, had $150,000 saved. He skipped health insurance for a year to save money, $400 a month in premiums. 6 months in, appendicitis, emergency surgery, complications, week in the hospital. The bill, $87,000. His savings, cut almost in half. There are 3 types of insurance you absolutely must have by 40. 1. Term life insurance, if anyone depends on your income. You need 10 to 12x your annual salary in term life insurance. If you make $70,000, that's $700,000 to $840,000 in coverage. And here's the key, term life, not whole life. Whole life is one of the biggest scams in personal finance. You're paying 10x more for an investment component, returning maybe 2 to 3% annually. A healthy 30-year-old can get a $1 million 30-year term policy for about $40 to $60 per month. That's the cost of streaming services to make sure your family isn't financially destroyed if you die. 2. Disability insurance. Here's the stat that should terrify you. You're 3 times more likely to become disabled than to die during your working years. If you become disabled and can't work, what happens to your income? Most employer coverage is only 60% of salary and maxes out at $5,000 to $10,000 per month. The goal is to replace at least 60 to 70% of your income until retirement age. 3. Umbrella liability insurance. Let's say you cause a car accident. Your car insurance covers $300,000 in liability, but medical bills end up being $800,000 and they sue you. That extra $500,000 comes from your savings, your house equity, your retirement accounts. Umbrella insurance gives you an additional $1 to $2 million in liability coverage. It costs about $200 to $300 per year. You're paying $1 a day to protect everything you've built from a catastrophic lawsuit. Here's the move. Get term life equal to 10x your salary. Make sure you have disability insurance covering 60% of income. Get a $1 to $2 million umbrella policy. Yes, you'll pay maybe $2,000 to $3,000 per year total, but you're protecting decades of wealth building from being wiped out by a single event.
All right, this might be the most important move on this list. You need to have explicit conversations about money with your partner before you legally or financially entangle your lives. Here's what most people don't realize. Money fights aren't actually about money. They're about values and priorities you never discussed because it felt awkward. And by the time you're having screaming matches about whether to buy a new car, it's too late. Look, there's this study from Kansas State University that found arguments about money are the top predictor of divorce. Not sex, not in-laws, money. And the frequency of arguments is a better predictor than the amount of money you have. Here's the thing. You and your partner probably have completely different money scripts. Maybe you grew up in scarcity and you're a compulsive saver. Maybe they see money as a tool for experiences. Neither is wrong, but if you don't align these perspectives, you'll fight forever. Here's the framework for the conversation you need to have. 1. Debt disclosure. Everything. Student loans, credit cards, car loans, medical debt, not just balances, interest rates, and minimum payments. 2. Credit score sharing. When you buy a house together, they use the lower score. If you have a 780 and your partner has a 620, you're getting rates based on the 620. That could cost tens of thousands in extra interest. 3. Income and earning potential. Be explicit about who makes what and the trajectory. 4. Financial goals and timeline. Retire early, buy a house, kids, travel. These goals have price tags and timelines. 5. Spending philosophy. Separate accounts, joint accounts, or both. Who pays for what? What's the threshold for checking with each other? Now, you might be thinking, Jack, this sounds unromantic.
You're right, but you know what else isn't romantic? Fighting about money for 20 years and getting divorced. Here's the move. Schedule a money date with your partner this week. Go through each topic systematically. Approach it as us versus the problem, not me versus you. You're building a shared vision, not litigating who's better with money.
Okay, here's the final move. You need to know your freedom number, the specific amount of money you need invested to be financially free. Here's what most people don't realize. Retirement planning isn't about retirement. It's about having enough assets that you can live off the returns without touching the principal. Once you hit that number, work becomes optional. Most people have no idea what this number is. They just think more is better and hope it'll work out. But without a specific target, you have no way to know if you're on track. So let's calculate it using the rule of 25 and 4% rule. Figure out your annual expenses in retirement, let's say $60,000. Multiply by 25. That's your freedom number, $1.5 million. You can withdraw 4% annually, $60,000, and historically, your portfolio lasts 30 plus years. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's say you're 30 and want to be free by 55. That's 25 years. How much do you need to invest monthly to hit $1.5 million? At 9% annual returns, you need to invest about $1,665 per month. That includes your 401k, employer match, IRA, taxable brokerage, everything. If you're making $75,000 and saving 20%, you're already most of the way there. And here's what changes once you know this number. Every financial decision becomes clear. Should you buy the $40,000 car or the $25,000 car? The difference is $15,000. If you invest that at age 30 at 9% returns, it'll be worth $204,000 by age 55. You just gave up a year and a half of freedom for a nicer car. Now you might be thinking, $1.5 million, I'll never get there. Look, most people dramatically underestimate what's possible. If you started investing $500 per month at 25 and increased it by just $50 per month every year, by 55, you'd have over $1.6 million at 9% returns. But here's the thing, the freedom number isn't just about retirement, it's about creating options. Maybe at $500,000 invested, you can take a lower-paying job you're passionate about. Maybe at $800,000, you can start a business. The number gives you waypoints towards increasing levels of freedom. Here's the move. Calculate your personal freedom number this week. Be honest about your expenses. Then work backwards to figure out how much you need to invest monthly. That monthly number becomes your new baseline. Everything else in your financial life should be optimized around hitting that number consistently. Look, here's the thing that nobody tells you about money. The game is rigged, but not in the way you think. It's rigged in favor of people who understand compound interest and take action early. You can go from broke at 30 to financially free at 55, but only if you make these moves now. Not one day, not when you get around to it, now. Because here's what most people don't realize. The difference between someone who's financially free at 55 and someone who's stressed about money at 65 isn't talent, intelligence, or even income. It's these 10 moves executed consistently over decades. So let me ask you, which person do you want to be? If this video helped you, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Drop a comment below and let me know which of these 10 moves you're committing to implementing this week. And yes, I actually read the comments. And remember, the best time to make these moves was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. I'll see you in the next video.